Shalom. This week's Torah portion is Parashat Vayeshev, the 9th Torah portion in Bereshit, Genesis, beginning in chapter 37. At the opening of his novel Anna Karenina, the famed Russian novelist Leo Tolstoy writes, "All happy families resemble one another, but each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way." From the outset of our portion, there's tension and trouble in Yaakov's household. The family dynamics are, complicated. It was easy for Yaakov's other sons to see that he favored Yosef, the son of his old age, having presented him with a special garment. There's so much that needs to be studied and understood about these early days of the patriarch Yaakov and his family to become known as the children of Israel. Currently in our weekly Zoom classes, we're continuing to study the deeper meaning of the lives of the forefathers and the multi-leveled meanings of Yosef's story. You're invited to participate in and follow these classes. But as we always stress, in the book of Genesis, we're learning of patterns that are being set into motion to bring about historical processes which will fulfill Hashem's will. Nothing in the Torah is ever anecdotal, and everything which is recorded is of fundamental significance for all time. Clearly now, as the book of Genesis nears its conclusion, the events of our Parsha reveal how Hashem is orchestrating the circumstances that will bring about the descent of Israel into Egypt, in order to set the stage for the development of this people and for all of history, according to the divine will. Yaakov and his children are the founders of the nation, and it was Yosef's treatment at the hands of his brothers that led to what became Israel's exile in the land of Egypt. Everyone involved in this story is playing out their role, and, think what they may, everything is arranged by divine providence. Yosef always realized this, as he will eventually tell his brothers when he is reunited with them in Parashat Vayigash. He'll tell them that it was all part of God's plan and ultimately all for the good. But for reasons that were determined by Hashem's wisdom alone, the nation of Israel's exile in Egypt had already been decreed, yet at the covenant between the portions, when it was foretold to Abraham back in Genesis chapter 15, "Know of a certainty that your offspring shall be strangers in a land not their own, and they will serve them, and they will oppress them 400 years. God had decreed already that that had to happen. Why? The sages put forth various ideas, and we would really need like 2,000 years to discuss this one point. But the simple understanding is that this exile served as a preparation for the giving of the Torah. It prepared the hearts of the children of Israel for accepting the Torah and for their responsibilities of nationhood and for their duties in the world. Torah tells us that Yosef's brothers saw that it was he whom their father loved most. So they hated him, and they could not speak to him peaceably. It's hard to understand this story. The holy brothers, the tribes of Israel, were righteous men. Yaakov's favoring of Yosef and Yosef's conduct and his insistence on telling them his dreams certainly didn't help matters. But on the deepest level of meaning, the disagreement between Yosef and his brothers was not a trivial thing. It concerned nothing less than how to fix the chaos brought into the world when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge. Meaning, they were in disagreement about how to serve Hashem in this world, how to clarify and sift through the mixture of good and evil, which we all confront as the substance of this world's reality. The goal is to bring the light of holiness into this world, and Yaakov knew that this would be accomplished in a special way by Yosef. Of all his children, he knew that Yosef was best equipped to be firmly part of this physical world, yet strong enough to not allow it to conquer him, as evidenced by Yosef's victory over himself later in this parsha, passing the test of temptation of his master's wife. Yaakov knew that Yosef could be the conduit of divine blessing, and that he alone could channel it to the rest of the tribes of Israel. Yaakov saw Yosef as the continuation of the legacy of Abraham, itself the legacy of Adam, to bring the knowledge of Hashem into this world and ultimately to bring about the redemption. Yet despite the simultaneously coexisting levels of meaning to be found within Torah, we cannot disregard the simple level of understanding of what we are reading here. Our sages relate that the sale of Yosef was a sin so severe that it created concentric circles of repercussions that spiral out throughout time and that must be accounted for in every generation. Despite Yaakov's righteousness and the high spiritual levels of Yosef and his brothers, none are beyond the reproach of our sages, who teach that the appearance of Yaakov's favoritism towards Yosef is what led to this devastating sibling rivalry, reminding us how important it is that parents never make this type of mistake. Yosef's saga really begins when he told over his dreams of grandeur to his brothers, dreams which foretold that he would hold authority over his brothers. We read, beginning in verse 5, Yosef dreamt a dream which he told to his brothers, and they hated him even more. He said to them, Hear, if you please, this dream which I dreamt. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the middle of the field, when, behold, my sheaf arose and also remained standing. And then, behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf. His brothers said to him, Would you then reign over us? Would you then dominate us? And they hated him even more, because of his dreams and because of his talk. He dreamed another dream and related it to his brothers, and he said, Look, here's another dream I had. Behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. Yosef's recounting of his dreams so irked and alienated his brothers and fanned the flames of their animosity that they could no longer bear him. They called him Baal HaChalamot, as in verse 19, and they said to one another, Look, here's that Baal HaChalamot coming. It's translated as that dreamer, but it really means that master of dreams. Indeed, Yosef is the master of dreams. And as we know, on a mystical level, this month of Kislev is associated with dreams, with the quality of dreaming. How apropos, because Yosef's descent into Egypt was brought about by his dreams, and once there, his ascent to power was brought about by the dreams of Pharaoh's officers and then by the dream of Pharaoh himself. But although Yosef's dreams alluded to grandeur and dominion, as our Parsha gets underway, we witness not a meteoric rise to success, but a shattering descent. Yosef is plunged further and further into loneliness and isolation, into darkness and despair. Misunderstood, underrated, his own brothers having conspired against him and thrown him into a pit, only to be sold as a slave. And then in Egypt, his master Potiphar's lustful, wanton wife fails to seduce him, but successfully frames him. He's sent to prison. What else could happen to a boy? How must he feel? He's orphaned from his mother. He knows that his brother despise him. His connection with his beloved father is severed, is lost. Does his father even know where he is and what has become of him? Does his father even know he's alive? His situation seems hopeless, one of unimaginable despair, and the angst is palpable. So open up your heart in the deepest way. Suddenly, in next week's Torah portion of Miketz, we will witness a breathtaking, incredible change, a shift. Everything begins to turn around completely, and Yosef begins to ascend. He is catapulted from the lowest point to the highest, quickly becoming second in command to the most powerful man in the world. In Psalms 30, King David prays, I will exalt you, Hashem, for you have raised me up, and you have not allowed my enemies to rejoice over me. O Hashem, I have cried out to you, and you have healed me. Hashem, you have brought my soul from the grave. You have revived me from my descent into the pit. From the pit indeed. These words literally describe Yosef's experiences, his revival from descent into the pit, experiences that were directed and guided by the hand of Hashem. But open up your heart. When did this hope first begin to blossom in the darkness for Yosef? Actually, we can pinpoint the exact moment when this turnabout began. It was when the chamberlain of the cupbearers and the chamberlain of the bakers told Yosef their dreams. And there he is, abandoned by his family, languishing in a prison cell in a foreign country, a son of Yaakov, surrounded by idolaters, framed for a crime he never committed. We might think that he would be somewhat jaded or at best doubtful regarding divine providence, but what does he say? He says to them, do not the answers belong to God? Relate to me, if you please. And from that moment, Yosef begins to ascend, as he later says to Pharaoh, that is beyond me. It is not I, but God who will respond with Pharaoh's welfare. Through all these difficulties and tribulations, Yosef learned that he had to make space for Hashem in his heart and in his thoughts, and in so doing, the reality of his life became a vessel that brought forth divine blessing for the whole world. He literally became, as we will read in chapter 42 and verse 6, in Parashat Miketz, he became the provider, the sustainer. And this is so powerful. He never felt alone or distanced from God, even after all he had been through. He knew that Hashem was with him when his brothers conspired against him, and when he was in the pit, and when he was tested by Potiphar's wife. Open up your heart. From the brothers' deep pit to the deep pit of Egypt, from the depths of despair, Yosef understands that the answers, not only of dreams, but of all of life's answers, are only in the hands of God. Yosef went through a difficult transition from dreams of ruling and kingship to a deep and dark pit, to a dank prison cell, in order to merit that power that Hashem had showed him he would have in his dream. The circuitous route that led to fulfillment of his own dream required him to totally nullify himself to Hashem. It was when he was able to fully acknowledge that to God are the answers that he began to ascend. When he realized that he was totally dependent upon Hashem and that he himself had no ability to influence reality. That's when he succeeded in bringing about the transformation in his own life. He learned that he's not in the center, but God is the center, and everything is from his power. And about that pit that the brothers threw him into, verse 24 states, "And the pit was empty, there was no water in it." Our sages ask, why does the Torah, which does not include even one extraneous word, why does it need to tell us that there was no water in the pit? If we are told that it was empty, do we not know that it had no water? And the answer that's given is that there was no water in it, but there were snakes and scorpions in it. An amazing midrash relates in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak that on the way back from Yosef's trip to the land of Canaan to bury his father, which we'll read about in Parashat Vayeshev in chapter 50, and the concluding chapter of Sefer Breshit, Yosef stopped by that pit to take a look at it. A pit stop. What was he, nostalgic to see the place again, a pit crawling with snakes and scorpions to recall the worst experience of his life? No, Rabbi Tanchum states he went for the sake of heaven, meaning he went to recite the special blessing that an individual recites in a place in which a miracle was wrought for him. So Yosef understood everything. He knew that it was Hashem's providence that saved him so that he would be able to rise to power and be in a position to save his family and the whole world from famine. He knew that God was with him in the pit and that God was with him in Pharaoh's palace. Psalms 139 puts it perfectly. "Where shall I go from your spirit, and where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to the heavens, there you are, and if I make my bed in the grave, behold, you are there." This Torah portion of Vayeshev, as well as next week's portion of Miketz, are almost always read around the time of Hanukkah. Everything that Yosef represents is inexorably bound up with the themes of Hanukkah. Redemption. Mashiach ben Yosef paves the way and prepares for the ultimate redemption accomplished by Mashiach ben David, just as Yosef had to descend into Egypt in advance of Yehuda and his brothers. The potential of both of those forces of the scion of Joseph and the scion of Yehuda begin to shine forth in our Parsha. And Yosef, who maintained his holiness and withstood the test of his master's wife, not only survived but thrived and flourished as an uncompromising Jew in the depths of the heathen culture of Egypt, just as Hanukkah recounts the attempt of a heathen culture to destroy our connection to the God of Israel. Our sages referred to the reign of Greece as darkness, teaching us that they darkened the eyes of Israel through the decrees they made against Shabbat and Rosh Chodesh and circumcision and Torah study. Decrees which were all about denying the presence of the one God in this world and denying that we have the ability to sanctify ourselves, to sanctify time, and even everyday life to bring holiness into this world. But open up your hearts. The victory of the Maccabees at Hanukkah was not a human victory. They were brave, they were outnumbered, but in the special holiday prayers, we ascribe the victory to the Holy One himself, reminding ourselves, you fought their battle, you judged their judgment, you avenged their vengeance. Hanukkah's message is that everyday natural reality is miraculous. The fabricated darkness of the Greeks was intended to obscure the miraculous, but Yosef already showed us the way to discern God's guiding hand, his providence, working in the midst of history. Against all odds, Yosef believed in his own dreams, just as Hanukkah teaches us to believe in miracles, to believe in our own dreams against all odds. We're living in very challenging times, challenges that are unprecedented. This festival of Hanukkah is about revealing the hidden light of creation in this world, but also about revealing the light within each one of us, and that we get from Yosef. We kindle the Hanukkah lights and acknowledge that Hashem wrought miracles for our fathers and continues to make miracles in our lives today. We gaze into the lights and realize that it's Hashem who watches over us, and we draw our strength, our life force from Him. This Hanukkah, let's light up the world, bringing back a spark of the hidden light of creation and reconnecting with the light of Hashem's guiding hand to see the miracles hidden yet revealed within our own lives. as Yosef taught us. Please remember to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. If you enjoy these presentations and benefit from these teachings, please consider helping Jerusalem Lights with your support. Only your support enables these broadcasts to continue and grow.